Good day, YouTube. Back with another video here, and as you can see, we're making some progress. Well, just moving along with the project here. But what we have on the table is the bottom part of the hood for the 66 Chevy Impala. And as you can see, piece by piece, from the last part that I've completed, I've decided to move on to the bottom of the hood here, which is actually one of the hardest parts because there's so many different mountains of positions on this piece here. So I'm actually glad that I'm getting this done. But as you can see, due to the years of just usage, there's just lots of debris, there's rust. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this. This is actually a Canada car. So it's something about the layers of protection that was added on this paint that makes it much more difficult to actually get to the metal. But what I'm doing here, I'm just trying out different methods and techniques to see how can I actually clean out this surface and get it prepped for some good paint here before I actually move on to the outside of the vehicle. But just working with the Ryobi drill here, and I have a wire brush that I'm kind of going through the edges with. And as you can see beneath this black paint is just so much rust that actually occurred beneath the paint, which I actually have to address because that will just make way for more problems down the line if that is not corrected. But as you can see, the paint retard from the last clip prior, you can see that it's actually disseminating the rust here, and it's kind of killing it off. But the rust is just so far in depth to where I cannot just depend on the rust retard to remove it. But I'm actually going to have to sand this down a little just to rid the surfaces of the rusty area. Now that is just the black paint, which is actually coming off with the rust retard. Beneath that paint, there were just so much rust that I applied the rust chemical on there and it started to come up. But on top of that, the paint was coming up with it because the rust was actually beneath the paint. But just here and there, working on different methods, seeing how I can actually get it down to the metal. And I'm kind of debating. There are certain areas that still look good as far as the surface and the paint that is on it, and which actually would make way for a good application of paint on top. But at the same time, I don't want uneven areas. Now in this clip, as you can see, YouTube, I've got far in the project here, so I did make a lot of progress. You can see a lot of that paint is actually removed from the surface, and I've decided to remove the painted surfaces because it was just too much corrosion. Now these are just different assortment of wire wheels that I have in front of me here, and I'm trying to see which one will make way for the better job to actually get in between the cracks, which are kind of difficult for me to get into. But beneath the open areas here, it's hard to get into, so it requires that I use these wire wheels to actually fit them in between because there's just so much buildup on the inside. And prior to painting, I want to make sure that I address that because the pressure from the air gun could actually cause these pieces to break loose, and then we'll just have a big mess on top of our paint. So with the angle grinder, I have one of the wheels here, and I'm slightly just fitting it into the open areas of the construction of this hood here. And as you can see, there's just more debris that's just coming up, and I'm glad that I'm actually addressing this because these are the hazard points which could become a problem later on into the project. So I want to make sure that I address certain areas which could become much more of a headache, and it's just one less thing to deal with. But as you can see, the paint is completely off the hood here. I've already added a layer of the rust protection, and I'm adding some more. And a good thing about this rust protection here, I believe after I completely got rid of the paint, I let it sit for 24 hours, and this is it. And as you can see, there's no rust that actually came back. Now, if I did not spray that rust retard on there and let it sit for a whole night, that whole surface of the hood would have just been covered with a rejuvenated rust over the areas which I would have had to address again. Now, focusing on the edges of the hood here. Now, this is a complicated task because when I flip this hood around, I'm gonna have to readdress those sides again, but I want to make sure that I take care of those edges now rather than to focus on them when I'm working on the outside of the hood here, which would just be an easier process knowing that those areas have been conditioned properly for paint. But as you can see, the surface is real tacky. Got rid of the debris and also all of the chemicals which will interfere with the adhesion of the primer that I'm prepping for here. Now, I just want to make sure that you shake up the can, and this is a Eastwood 2-to-1 primer. It's a professional primer that I'm using here, and it's dedicated for steel, so there will be good adhesion and protection for the metal here. And it actually sticks to the metal like glue. It creates a nice surface, and I just love to paint over it with the Sublime Green. I've come to find that it doesn't give a problem at all, but it actually works great. Now we're doing a 2-to-1. I don't have a 2-to-1 cup, so I'm running the primer up to, I guess, a level of 4, and then the catalyst that comes with it to another level of 8. Combined half and half, that's your 2-to-1 there. And now pretty much just spraying all of these surfaces and seeing to it that all of the metal is covered, so we don't have any open spots where corrosion can occur again. Now, because this hood has different levels of layers, it's not just doing a pass through with the paint gun, but I find myself in some odd angles actually trying to get the paint into certain areas that were just difficult to get into. But as you can see here, just doing sweeps left and right and seeing to it that all of the areas are symmetrical and covered and protected. That way when I lay the paint, everything is okay. Now it's still flashing here. This is right after paint. Within the deep surfaces, you can see there's still some of the metal, like a translucent look. I will touch that up with a little bit of more paint. Now this is 4 hours in, and this primer is actually still flashing. I gave it a real heavy coat one time and just did a slight pass through to cover the areas that seemed a little lighter than the neighboring sides. But yeah, this primer here, at times I come to find that I cannot just directly paint over while it's flashing because it kind of interferes with the quality of the paint. So I'll completely let this flash here, and I believe I gave it 24 hours. And it was just a slow process. I guess the temperature in the garage also played a part. It was, if I could calculate, I would say it was 100 degrees. Now this is our paint here, and this is our 3-to-1. Now because this is a 3-to-1, it has the paint, it has the reducer, but it also has the hardener all within the paint. And because this is the bottom portion of the hood here, I did not want to give it a heavy layer of the paint since it's the bottom and it's not an area that will present itself as much as the outside, and I didn't want to just use up all of the material to kind of cover that bottom side, but I do want it to look well presentable to the eye. Now this is our sublime green. This is the first step of our paint here. I have everything set up with the Fuji Minimite 5 system, and we're using the 3M PPS 2.0 kit here, which allows for better angling, especially on a part like this that has certain areas where I would have to angle the gun in a bunch of odd positions to get it in the areas where I would like it to be. Now always make sure that you're blowing out your part. Make sure that everything is tacky, because the tackiness actually helps for the paint to stick. See to it that the panel is completely flashed off with anything that you might have sprayed on it, like your degreaser. Making sure also that all of the tools that I need for the job is present, prepped, and ready to go. So before I actually move on to the paint here, I got a tack rag, and I'm actually going to tack everything off since this has just been sitting in the garage for 24 hours. And at the same time, I can examine all of the little cracks in the areas to make sure that that primer has completely flashed off. And everything is looking good so far. Just give it a good tack, remove any dust particles, and at the same time any added stuff that might have landed on the hood here. And this tack rag, it has a real tacky like sheen feeling to it, to where it not only wipes, but it plays good in removing debris that might have landed on the hood. It's kind of like gluey, so it picks up little particles that might have landed on there better than a microfiber towel would. So giving a slight pass, checking all of the cracks, and there's so many different areas that needs to be addressed when using the tack rag, seeing to it that all of the areas are covered. Also, before I tacked off the areas, I degreased the whole panel with the restoration shop, which is actually a degreaser chemical that I like to use. I find that it works great for me. It flashes off pretty quick, and it dries very fast to where I could wipe it all off and get to painting knowing that it's dry and tacky. Now I'm just applying the sublime green here, and this is just one coat, and it's the light coat, I would say. I had the gun set to high pressure of air with a fair amount of green, and because the primer also works as a good sealer, you can see that it covered the areas pretty well. But as you can see, some corners there was still some of the primer showing, so I had to give it another touch up. So it was just one layer of the sublime green and then a touch up of the areas where I saw that the green was not as present as the others. It's still flashing here. This is just the light coat, so the clear coat that actually comes with this green color is not presenting itself as good as it did on some of the other panels that you may have saw that I painted. Now moving on to the clear coat, while the panel is still flashing off here, I've decided to move on to the pigmentation that I'm using for the sublime green here. And no intra coat, just the Eastwood European clear I'm using as the intra coat layer before I add the clear coat, which actually works as a clear coat, but keep in mind how it's being applied. It's not actually adding a complete shine to the hood. I'm just using this portion here of the process to actually get the pigmentation on the hood, and that's the only reason for this. That pigment has to go on, and it needs a sort of chemical to actually combine with to do that, and I've decided to Use the regular clear coat that I have here for that part, and after that I'll just use that same clear coat to clear out the whole hood also. Now we have our measuring tools here. We want to make sure that we keep everything leveled. Since I'm painting this car in parts and not as a whole, I make sure that my levels of added pigmentation remain the same no matter what part that I'm doing, because I don't want certain areas of the different panels to look off. I want everything to kind of look the same. And this is the difficult part of painting when you're painting in parts, especially on a color that's not just a single solid color, and you're doing more steps to kind of create a color, because you can get certain areas that just don't look the same as others if you're veering away from all of your measurements and everything that you're doing. Now we have our pigment added, we have our clear coat set up here, and pretty much gonna lay everything down, and then I'll determine from there just to see how everything comes out. Keep in mind also, when mixing your clear, I come to find once that hardener is added, you have a window to actually apply this material over the part that you're painting, because if not, it actually starts to harden in the cup. This is just something that I've experienced with the mixing clear coat. So once it's mixed, it's best that you start to apply it, because in one of the applications here, I actually started to get real bad gum up in the gun, and comes to find it was the clear coat that actually gummed up in the 2.0 paint cup here. So moving on, giving it just a slight mist coat of the pigmentation. It's not a heavy coat that I'm doing. Because this is the bottom surface, this is just light passes that I'm doing. And while doing this, because of the clear coat that I've had sitting in the cups, it actually started to gum up while painting. So I had to come up with a different solution to actually apply the clear, but also the pigmentation that I was doing here. The pigmentation application was not as bad as the clear. As you can see, I directly went to applying it over the hood, but the clear coat, which is actually just sitting, it's going through a process while it's just sitting there, and that hardener is actually activating itself to where it's just hardening within the cup, which can cause a gum up. And just from experience, I come to find that. So while painting, I was getting heavy droplets, and this is because the gum up that was actually in the cup. And I've already done 2 passes, and from that point, I'm at a position of no return. So I had to increase the amount of material that I was doing just to see if that would kind of help, so that while the clear coat is flashing, it would actually settle off a little better and flash to where everything seemed even. Now I also ran out of the clear coat, so I had to mix some more, and this was just a time window and a hazard, a headache I was running into here. So I had to mix up this clear, but also apply it over the hood, over the areas that just had major droplets. And when you're painting, there's just certain difficulties that you may run into, and this is where your techniques come into play here. I reloaded that second cup, and there were just so many large droplets, and I went a little heavy on this scene here, just to add a good heavy layer so that those droplets could actually blend in with the heavy coat that I was doing. Now, the good thing about clear coat, once it's applied, yes, I did get a lot of major orange peely areas, but with some wet sanding and buffing, I was able to correct that. And as you can see here, this is, I'd say, maybe 25 minutes in. It's still flashing off. And thanks to that second layer, as you can see, those heavy droplets that I had present on the hood is not as severe as it seemed while I was painting. I also ended up having to switch out the paint gun because for some reason it just was not applying the clear coat as I would have liked, and it normally does for me. But this is the outcome here. As you can see, I got a heavy layer of clear. This is actually 2 coats. The first coat was actually just all heavy droplets. And now in this scene here, I've decided to wet sand those areas. And judging by the angle of the camera, you can just see that there's just many areas that are just orange peely. But we'll address that. And that's the good thing about the clear coat. I have a heavy layer here, so that makes way for correction. So I have my 3-inch angle grinder, and as you can see here, just piece by piece, certain areas I'm sanding down, trying to get the surface to be a much more smoother surface, and then I'll just buff it out here to see what it actually does. And this is the 3M chemical that I'm using here in the process of buffing. I come to find that it does a great job with the buffer that I have here. So just applying my buffer in certain areas where I felt that there were just much more orange peely areas than others. I'll let it sit within those areas for maybe like a minute or two after applying the 3M compound, and then I kind of just lift to see how it's actually affecting the surface. And once that shine comes back, I just move on to a different area piece by piece until the whole hood is actually covered and back to a shine of my satisfaction. Now keep in mind, I keep a rag just to always wipe the areas, just to rid the surface of the compound, just to see how it looks after I buff. And once the shine is to my likings, I actually stop there and then I just move on. But as you can see, these are the areas that I did give it a light sand through. And the grit that I'm using is 1,000 grit sandpaper. Did not want to go too aggressive because I start to get those deep, heavy scratches. So I'll examine the hood just to see how it looks, to see if it's okay for my likings. And when I'm all done with the sanding and the buffing here, I'll give it a quick wipe down with the chemical that I have here, just to remove all of the compound and all of the debris from the buffing that I've been doing. I've decided to take it outside so that the sun would actually help to show some of the color shift. But as you can see, we have a much more shinier surface. Like I said, I used 1,000 grit. Did not want to severely sand it down to where I'm actually removing a lot of the clear coat, but it was just a light pass just to resurface and kind of remove some of the orange peel that was present. But as you can see here, things are looking quite more better than it did before. There was just a big boo-boo with the clear coat application, but here with a little bit of attention, as you can see, the orange peely areas are not as present as it seemed before, and we have a much more shinier surface here. Now I'll take it back inside just to see how it actually shifts on the paint here. And using the garage lights, you can see that the shine is actually much better. So there was a lot of correction that actually had to take place here with the clear coat, but as you can see, successfully done. There are areas with that I will examine and give a little bit more attention to, but you be the judge of it here. Everything is looking much better compared to how it did look before. And this was just my process and how I am restoring the hood here. And this is a before and after. Lots of debris, and now things are looking much more presentable to where I'm happy. It was quite a hard process because this is not a easy step when it comes to painting, because there's so many different curvatures and different angles that come into play, and judging by the type of tools that you're using, some areas were just not as easy to get into as to other areas. But the shine is back. The area is not as much orange peely as it was. And this is just the hood hinge. I believe I have another video on how I actually restored this part, reconditioned it to where it's a much more presentable hood hinge. And this is it, YouTube. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and continuing on with the process here.